A long-standing idea in the Genshin community is that the element of one's vision reflects the personal belief of their wielders. Those who have Anemo visions tend to value freedom, while Electro Vision wielders are supposed to exemplify the constancy of eternity. At least that's how the story goes. This idea came about when the law on the Archons was expanded through each Archon quest. The truth is though that there isn't any evidence to support this idea, and any person can get any vision element, and it's mostly up to the whims of Celestia. So far, an individual's personal characteristics doesn't seem to influence anything about their vision. But what about the Gnosis of the Archons? Do they abide by the same rules, and if not, could they potentially have their own unique abilities that relates to the belief system of each Archon? Or maybe the Gnosis are like Infinity Stones, each having a particular domain of power. The more I thought about this, the more interesting the idea became. So if the Gnosis of the Archons did have unique abilities, what would they end up being? Before we get into that, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. The Gnosis are a rather mysterious object. They are considered one of the primary targets of the Fatui and seem to be rather important to the story, yet we know very little about them. A description given to us by Venti essentially describes the Gnosis as a more powerful version of visions and are given only to the Archons. As far as the lore is concerned, there isn't any mention of the Gnosis having unique abilities, at least not yet. So the only way we can make up some abilities for them is to look at what their Archons believe in or maybe see what each Gnosis has been used for and go from there. Let's first start off with the Anemo Gnosis. The Anemo Archon is known as the God of Freedom, so it would stand to reason that his Gnosis would have something to do with the concept of freedom itself. But freedom is a rather difficult thing to describe or translate into an ability, so what I think the Anemo's Gnosis might be able to do is grant or rescind the free will of any being within its sphere of influence. Much like the Mind Stone, it might possess the ability to control others against their will and make them do whatever the wielder desires. A weaker version of this would be plausible as well, maybe like granting autonomy or a limited sentience to an inanimate object, or even subtly influencing other people. As powerful as controlling others may sound, if this really was an ability that the Anemo Gnosis has, it's likely Venti would never use it. We know for a fact that he wishes for the people of Mondstadt and people in general to have the freedom to live their life however they want, and this ability largely would fly in the face of his beliefs. I would wager that even among his enemies, he would be rather apprehensive about forcefully taking away their freedom as he understands better than most how important such a thing is. The many stories of how Venti is the weakest Archon might be in part due to the fact that he refuses to use his Gnosis' full abilities given his apprehensions. But I do think that this sort of ability would be in line with the whole theme of freedom the Anemo element has. Let's now move on to the Geo Gnosis. Throughout Genshin's story, the Geo Gnosis was known to have only been used for one thing, the creation of Mora. So based on this, I would guess that if the Geo Gnosis did have an ability, it may have something to do with replication. The ability to create perfect copies of one single thing and perhaps even alter them in some way. If it did have this ability though, why wouldn't Morax have abused it to benefit the people of Liyue? Well, I think it's because he knows the difference between just giving his people something for free and having them work for it. During the Archon War, he saw firsthand what happens if humans rely too much on the protection of the gods and the Adepti. In fact, throughout most of his Archon story, he was setting things up to remedy this by testing the citizens of Liyue on whether they are able to take care of themselves if he was no longer around. He even allowed the Fatui to release Osiel just to see what would happen. Being the god of commerce, he also likely wanted those in Liyue Harbor to prosper under their own efforts, and using the replication ability nonchalantly may have caused them to not bother working as hard and expect everything to be given. This might be why we only see him use it to produce Mora and nothing else. Before we move on to the Electro and Dendro Gnosis, I want to take a bit of a detour. I saw a video recently that suggested the Fatui Harbinger, the Doctor, had used the Gnosis available to the Fatui to create his time clones. If this turns out to be true, then coincidentally, the abilities of the Anemo and Geo Gnosis I've just shared here would fit right in. The Doctor could have used the Geo Gnosis to replicate himself and the Anemo Gnosis to grant his clones autonomy to act on their own. Now, this is a theory within a theory, so don't pay too much attention to it. I just thought it was an interesting enough idea to include as part of this video. Anyways, let's now talk about the Electro Gnosis. Honestly, with the Electro Gnosis, we haven't really seen it used for anything too specific. The only situation we've seen it used was to power the mechanical god body constructed for Scaramouche. The minute it was detached, it seemed as though the mech had stopped functioning altogether. So the Gnosis was likely used as a power source, and I have personally theorized this idea of a Gnosis being just batteries in another video. But I think that each of the Gnosis can already do this. If the Electro Gnosis were to have an ability, it would have to be something related to eternity. For the Electro Gnosis, an ability to suspend or maintain the condition of something permanently would be quite in line with the concept of eternity. Maybe the Electro Gnosis allows its user to prevent an object, person, or location from changing, much like a form of suspended animation, or like what we saw in the Eternal Oasis, which did actually mention eternity. But this idea is a bit unlikely. If the Gnosis did have this ability, then Raiden A would have likely used it to save her friend, and even put the whole of Inazuma into stasis, since that's what she was aiming for before the Traveler had intervened. You could argue that maybe being a new Archon, she just wasn't aware of this, but eternity is such a highbrow concept that I honestly can't come up with anything that doesn't sound absolutely broken and crazy. So let me know in the comments if you have some better ideas. Finally, we have the Dendro Gnosis. In the Sumeru storyline, we learned that the Dendro Gnosis was used to enable and power the Akasha Terminal. The exact mechanics of this isn't explained in detail, but seeing as how the Dendro Archon is the avatar of the Irminsul and has abilities related to the dream world, maybe the Dendro Gnosis gives the Archon the power over people's dreams. Alternatively, maybe the Gnosis grants a small portion of the abilities of the Irminsul itself that allows the user to connect and collect information directly from the minds of others. We actually got to see Nahida telepathically speaking to Scaramouche and the Traveler during the 3.3 Archon quest, so connecting to different minds might be something plausible. Greater Lord Rukkhadevata had also used the Akasha Terminal in this way in order to collect knowledge and wisdom from the people of Sumeru to prevent the spread of forbidden knowledge. So maybe this was actually a function of the Dendro Gnosis and hints at its unique ability. Of course, with Rukkhadevata's death and Nahida being a relatively new Archon, we might not yet be privy to its full capabilities, but this does seem to be in line with what we've seen so far. Now, all of this is just dumb theory ranting. There isn't anything that's specifically mentioned in the lore that makes any of this outright true, so just keep that in mind. I just thought it'd be interesting to explore the possibilities of the Gnosis having unique abilities. I mean, we still don't know the details of how they work, and maybe some of this could finally end up being true, but for now, just take it for what it is. Let me know what you think are the abilities of each Gnosis in the comments below. Maybe you guys have better ideas about it. But that brings the video to an end, and if you enjoyed it, do consider subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.